Mary, thank you so much for being on our Call to Farms podcast. What an honor to have you here. If you've not heard of Mary Shrader is the owner of Mary's Nest. And Mary, I just want to kick off to let you know that I have learned so much about you from your YouTube channel, and especially your easy cheese, what is it? Your easy cream cheese recipe.
Oh, well, Sophie, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here and getting to know you better.
I'm going to love this conversation. I know we're going to have a lot to talk about, but first we always kick off and want to learn more about your story. And I just love the little that I've heard from your story already. So just I'd love to hear how you got started and down this traditional way of living.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Well, I grew up in New York and we lived in the southern part of our county when I was little. And it's very cute because my father was a city boy. He was from Jersey City, but he had the heart of a country boy. And at some point, he announced to my mom and me that we needed to live in the country. And so that meant basically moving from the southern part of our county just to the northern part of our county because he still had to commute into New York City to go to work. So, but we moved to the northern part of our county. My parents bought a house on 3 acres. It had a well and a septic system. And as you can imagine, any of your listeners who have we didn't call it a homestead, but today people would say, oh, that was a little homestead. This was just our house in the country. When you have a well and you have a septic system and you live in New York and there are snowstorms and so on and so forth, there's always some adventure on a daily basis, it seems. Now, we didn't have any animals, but my mother had a big garden and all of that. Now, my mom grew up in a town in southern Westchester, but Westchester County, which was where we lived. But she grew up in a town called Harrison and then eventually moved to White Plains. But back then, today that it's extremely suburban. And back then it was definitely considered a suburb of New York City, but it was very different than it is today. There was a few houses and then maybe a farm and then maybe a few more houses, kind of what we think of today as when we hear the term rural residential. Yeah. And so my mom was, and also my mother was born in the 1920s. So growing up, my grandmother had a garden. She had fruit trees. Another lady might have chickens. Somebody else might have a cow with milk. And raw milk was, no one even called it that. It was just milk.
Right.
And you skimmed a little cream off the top for your coffee, and so on and so forth. But my mom was very cute. She would say that she was taught all the gentle arts of domesticity. And she knew how to cook and clean and garden and sew and household repairs. I mean, just everything. So she was very well suited when my father decided that we should live on acreage. So she just continued her ways of being. I mean, even when we lived in the southern part of our county, she was very self-sufficient and she had a pantry and she gardened and we even though we were in the suburbs, at the end of our street there was a person who still had a farm, and so she would get milk and eggs there, and we actually had a little metal box outside our front door where the man would leave the eggs and the milk. Because people were not so worried about refrigeration. Yeah. And so time, passes and we move up north to the northern part of the county. And my mother continues with all of these, gardening and home canning. And she was always making bone broth. We didn't call it that. I think she would just say broth or stock, and that she was always culturing milk and making yogurt. And it was very cute because my father was always a little concerned about some of the foods we ate, especially when the milk was left on the counter to culture. And it was cute because he'd say, do you think, should we put that in the refrigerator? And my mother say, oh no, it already went bad. We eat it when it goes bad. And that was just her way of saying that it had cultured, and he just would shake his head as the two of us were eating the homemade yogurt. She always had a sourdough starter going. She cultured vegetables. She learned how to do sauerkraut because that was something my father really liked, because he's of Irish descent, but he grew up working, when he lived in Jersey City, working in a little grocery store, and the man would give him a big piece of liverwurst as his reward at the end of the day. And then he would go next door to Mrs. Linda's bakery, and she had a German bakery, and she would give him two big, thick pieces. He'd say, oh, Mrs. Linda, what can I do? And he'd sweep up or whatever. She'd give him two big, thick pieces of homemade rye bread. And then she had a vat in the back culturing or fermenting cabbage into sauerkraut. So he grew up loving sauerkraut. So my mother learned how to make that, but she was Italian, Northern Italian. So she would always have the giardiniera, the mixed vegetables, culturing. And so this was commonplace for me to grow up with all of these things. I didn't think one way or another about it. And I didn't think anything about drinking raw milk. I didn't think about making yogurt homemade. I remember the first time I saw a yogurt at the grocery store. It was Dannon yogurt, and it had something in the bottom. And I remember telling my mother, because she was like, oh, let's see, what is this, And we bought it. And I saw there was like red, maybe it was strawberry, I don't know what it was, but there was some fruit in the bottom. And it was such a foreign concept. I was like, I don't like this, Mom. I don't, what's that on the bottom? So we had some funny experiences like that, but she home canned, and she just lived her life in the way she felt was how everyone should live their life, just being prepared, making food homemade. She never wasted anything. As a matter of fact, my mother passed away, unfortunately, last December. She was just a few weeks shy of her 99th birthday.
So
but oh, thank you. But we were blessed to have her with us for such a long time. But it was interesting because I had said to her, and not too long ago, a couple of months ago, we were talking about cooking and, having a no waste kitchen. It's cute. They have all these phrases today to go green and no waste kitchen and all. To my mother, that was normal life, But it was interesting because I said, Mom, I don't remember, because it would have been my responsibility. I don't remember ever taking out the garbage. And I said, when did the garbage men come? She said, we didn't have garbage men. There was no picking up garbage. She said, we didn't throw anything out. And she said, if by chance something needed to be discarded, which was extremely rare, she couldn't even remember. She said, your father would have had to put it in the station wagon and take it to the dump, and you had to pay. And she said, so that was not something that we were in the business of doing. She's, we used up everything. And I'll tell you a cute story that my father, when he was alive, he's also passed away now, but when he was alive, he was sitting at my kitchen table having a cup of coffee, and the newspaper, this is back when, it was common to get the newspaper, and the newspaper would be delivered, and it had a rubber band around it, and the rubber band was really dirty. And so I took the rubber band off and I put it in the garbage. And he looked at me and he said, my full first name is Mary Louise. He said, Mary Louise, you throw out the best stuff. Get that out of the trash. I'm taking that home with me. I can use that. But that's how I was raised. These people made it through the Great Depression of the 1930s. They made it through all of the rationing of World War II. And my parents, they were very optimistic. They were very hardworking, and they were very optimistic people. However, they always believed in being prepared. And they would say, you never know when something like the Great Depression may return, or we may go into another war. And when the 1970s came around and we had stagflation and gas lines and all of that, my mother said, see, you never know what's going to happen. But she had a very well-stocked pantry. She had a big garden. She didn't have to worry about feeding her family. The same with if we had a snowstorm. There was no panicking, even if we lost power. They had those, you don't see them much today, but the oil lamps.
Yeah.
And life went on, and if the well got hit by lightning, my father was out there fixing it, and, problems with the septic tank, he had fought in the Korean War. That wasn't going to hold him back, a septic system, So it was a very interesting upbringing that I had. And I think probably a lot of your listeners can relate to this because you go through stages in your life. And I got married a little later in life, and our son was born when I was in my early 40s. And as a single working woman, I let a lot of the things that my mother taught me fall to the wayside. I got very busy working. I, wasn't making the homemade yogurt. I wasn't making sourdough starter. My biggest accomplishments was roasting a chicken on Sundays. And then I would save the bones, and make broth. But for the most part, a lot of what I had learned went on the back burner. And I think you see this today with people who they may be living in the city or the suburbs, and they decide that they do want to change their lifestyle, that you have an epiphany. And when I moved to Texas, it's funny because I'm originally from New York, and as I shared with you, and then I lived and worked in New York City, and that I was born in the 1950s, and I'm living and working in New York City in the 1980s. And it was rough. It's not unlike what's come back in New York City today. There was a lot of crime, just a lot of problems, And it's kind of funny because I had been assaulted on the subway. I had my purse stolen once. I had my wristwatch taken. I said, I got to move. And the day, you can't make this stuff up. The day I'm moving, my mom brings my car into the city. It's parked in front of my apartment building. I'm just saying goodbye to the moving truck and giving my keys to the landlord. My trunk is popped. Everything in it is robbed. And when I come out, my mother is in the car accepting a ticket from a police officer because I had double parked. You can't make it up,
What?
And I'm saying to the cop, my trunk was popped. He's like, oh, God bless you, but we're never going to find those people. But you double parked, so I got to give you a ticket. I said, I'm not moving soon enough.
Oh, wow. And that was the 80s?
That was the 1980s.
Wow. Okay. That's not very different from
today.
So much that we share in common. I'm coming from California, but the crime rate is no different now. In fact, from what I hear, people are actually putting their windows down in their cars because it's a lot cheaper to just show the burglars that there's nothing in the car versus them having to break the window.
That's a very interesting strategy, and I can understand it. I really can, It's crazy. And so I took a job in the Washington, D.C. area, and I lived in Northern Virginia. And I had a little townhouse, and I thought I died and went to heaven. I actually had a kitchen that you could stand up in and put a table in, versus this tiny little railroad kind of kitchen that I had in my Manhattan apartment. But I had a kitchen table and 2 chairs. This was amazing. And so I started getting in, a little better to cooking, but I'm still single and living my life and working long hours. And my parents moved to Texas because my father was transferred with his job. And my parents were very excited. They were still in New York. They were very happy to relocate because at this point my father was actually kind of close to retirement. And so that's why he went, because he knew it would be harder to find a job, in his 60s. And so they were very excited, Texas, oh, this is going to be an adventure. Yeah. So I think there's just a real allure to it. You think cowboys and, ranches. And, my father's dream was to have a little ranchette, and they had something very similar. They had a home very similar to the one we had in New York. And it was, I think, about 3 acres. So just Texas style.
Right.
But I was living in Virginia, Northern Virginia, in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And my parents had said, would you consider relocating? I'm an only child. My mother also got married a little later in life and had me a little later. But I had my house and my job, and I was like, I will. I just don't know if I can really do it right now. Right. But I will, especially, I wasn't going to let them be senior citizens and without my help, nearby. But it was 2 days before Christmas. I was driving home from work, and a teenager ran a stop sign and crashed into me and totaled my car. I walked away without a scratch. It was a miracle.
Wow.
And I'm sitting on the curb in the rain, waiting for the cops, waiting for the tow truck, comforting the teenager, who was a girl who was just in a total panic. She actually came home with me because she was too afraid to go home to her parents. And I had to call her parents and explain, oh, Mamma Mia, what a night. So I'm sitting there in the rain, and I just had an epiphany. I said, what am I doing? I work all the time. I have no life. I'm in my late 30s. I need a change. And so the next day I had to catch a red eye to Dallas to spend Christmas with my parents for a few days. And I get off the plane, and I probably looked like something the rat dragged in. I was so bedraggled. I had been up all night. And I get off the plane, and my parents look at me, like, you doing okay? I said, I'm moving to Texas. And they were so happy. So we come to Texas, or I come to Texas, with dogs in tow. And my parents say to me, you're single, you're not married, you're older, you don't have any children. Let's not do like the whole Christmas tree and all of that. Let's go on a little vacation. And you're welcome to join us. So I said, oh, that sounds nice. So we go to the Austin airport. And who do I meet? My husband, Ted. We get to chatting. We're on the same plane. And you won't believe this. I'm a grown woman, but I'm traveling with my parents. My husband is taking his mother to a wedding of her sister in her 70s who's getting married for the first time. So there's 5 of us all chatting. Now, my parents had never been to Vietnam, but my father had been to Korea, Japan, China, and my mother-in-law's father was originally from China. So my father and my mother-in-law are chatting like crazy, getting along great. And they just are. My mother-in-law is such a fascinating and interesting person. And we all go. This is back when Southwest Airlines, you didn't have seat assignments. You just had a little plastic placard that, this is pre 9/11. There's like no security check, nothing. You've got a little plastic placard. This must have been 1995, 1996. We all get on the plane and we all sit together. And this is back when you could make the seats face each other, like you're on a train.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not safe.
Were you flying internationally to Vietnam?
No, we were met at the Austin airport in Austin, Texas, and my husband and his mom were just flying down to Houston. Oh. This is divine intervention, because normally my husband would just drive. It's not that far.
I was going to say, yeah.
But his dad was saying, oh, my mother-in-law had flown in from Nevada. They were living in Nevada at the time. And my father-in-law had said, oh, what if you had car trouble or something? You and mom just fly to Houston. They had always driven before. That's why I say divine intervention.
Yes.
And we were flying to New Orleans, but it's used to be, and I don't know how it is now, but it's very difficult sometimes to get out of Austin because it's not Dallas or Houston. Yeah. And so we had to fly to Houston, and then we had to go from Houston to New Orleans because we were going to take a cruise, and the cruise ship was leaving from New Orleans. So the 5 of us fly to Houston. We're on the plane together, chatting it up. And my husband and I just exchanged business cards. I don't think, to be honest with you, either of us were thinking of any potential romance at the time because I'm 10 years older than my husband. So I saw him as a younger man, and he probably saw me as somebody older. But we were chatting and got along and exchanged business cards. And when I got back to Austin, he had sent me an email inviting me to get together. And we got together and we just really hit it off. And it was very cute because I had said, oh, I'm older than you. And he said, oh, yeah, I figured as such. I said, I'm 10 years older than you. And he said, oh, it doesn't bother me. And I was very surprised. I came to learn my mother-in-law was older than my father-in-law, and my mother is actually older than my father. So we often joke with my son, and we say, God bless you. How old the heck is your wife going to be? But we had 7 dates, and he proposed marriage. We got married, and about 3 weeks into our marriage, I got pregnant, had a beautiful son. And I said, okay, I'm going back to the gentle arts of domesticity. And I am going to be making all the foods my mother raised me on, because this is what I want to raise our son on, and really run a very traditional foods household. And I had a house in Austin that I had already sold. My husband had a house in Austin. We lived there about 3 weeks. And then we sold that house. And because it was when we moved into this house out here, it was literally within days that I found out I was pregnant. And we were so happy because this is out where my parents lived, and they were just 5 minutes from us. And I knew I was going to need help. And so we bought this, just an old house. And back then, there were only about 3,000 people in this town.
In Austin,
well, we live in a town called Lakeway. Okay. We live in the Texas Hill Country. We moved west of Austin, and it was affordable, and it gave us a little more breathing room. And there were only 3,000 people here, and our house is on like about a 1/4 of an acre lot, and then we own the lot next door. So just about a 1/2 an acre. My parents had 3 acres. But with the suburban sprawl, this town has gone from probably about 3,000 people, I would say pushing up to maybe 20,000 people.
Wow.
So we have seen massive suburban sprawl.
Right.
It's harder to get raw milk and eggs. But back, our son now is 20, he's 25, he'll be 26 this year. I just embraced everything. And my mother was cute. She was just 5 minutes away. And when our son was first born, it was cute because she would call up. She'd say, what are you planning for the evening meal for when your husband returns home? I'd say, Mom, I've been up all night. I haven't had a shower. I'm exhausted. And she'd be, don't worry, I'll be right over. Oh. But so then my son was born in 1990. We were married in 97. Our son was born in 98. And right around that time, maybe it was 99, I'm not exactly sure, Sally Fallon's book, Nourishing Traditions, came out. Uh-huh. And I somehow stumbled upon it, and it was very cute. And I always liked the way she talked about eating butter, because my mother ate butter all her life. And it was very cute because when the low fat movement came and everybody was doing low fat, and her doctor was saying, stop the butter. Mind you, my mother was very healthy. She was never hospitalized. She never had an operation, nothing. And she told me, she said, do not go low fat. She said, that is not good for people. That's fake food. I don't know what this margarine is. You know, they tried to push this during World War II, and they would get this white stuff in a bag. We'd have to open the capsule. My father remembered the same thing of some kind of food coloring, and then we had to squeeze it to make it turn yellow and look like butter. And she said, my mother said, this can't be good. And even my paternal grandmother had, you know, a sense this was not healthy. And even though my father's side of the family was extremely poor, and she was just using bones and making bone broth all the time. And my father was funny because when bone broth became so popular and was $12 a bottle at the grocery store, he said, ooh, the food of the poor has become all she. But they're squeezing this to make it, you know, with some kind of margarine product, hydrogenated, and the squeezing in the food coloring. And both of my grandmothers were like, no, we'll eat something else. We may not be able to get butter, but we'll eat something else. My mother was lucky. They had a little more flexibility because of where they lived. My father actually lived in Jersey City. So they were, you know, city bound, and that life was a lot more difficult for them. But I wanted to, so my mother was like, please do not go low fat. I didn't listen. And that was such a big mistake. And when I finally got my senses back and reintroduced butter and cream and all of these things into my diet, I felt much better. And I really credit that with my ability to get pregnant so easily in my early 40s. And have a happy, healthy. I did deliver a little early. I was in my 37th week, but I had a happy and healthy baby. And I really believe that it's the nutrition, you know. So my mother was so happy. She felt very vindicated by Sally's book. And she's like, yes, this lady is spot on. This is how everybody should be eating. Now, there were foods that were new to us, like kefir and kombucha. I didn't have any of that growing up. But I was very interested in kefir, or kefir, depending on how people say it. And this is pre-Facebook. None of this existed. There was just Yahoo. And I was in a little Nourishing Traditions Yahoo group. And I met a lady in New Mexico. And so she said, send me $1.25 for postage, and I'll send you a plastic bag with some of the grains in it to make kefir. I said, great. And it was cute because my husband was like, who are you getting this from? You don't know these people. How this is poison, and you don't know. You know, you know how the traditional foods movement is. We just forge ahead. You know? So it was very funny, and it was cute because I said to my son, grew up drinking raw milk and eating homemade yogurt and bone broth and all of that. But when I made the kefir, it was very funny because, you know, it's fizzy and it's very tangy. And I said, this is good. I said, Ben, his name's Ben. I said, they call this the champagne of milk. And he's so cute because I told our friend Chardin this. And my son looked at me and he said, thanks, Mom, but I don't drink. The champagne of milk, you know. But I was a homeschool mom. Our son has very severe dyslexia. And at the time, the schools here were not really set up to help with that. And in Austin, they actually have a school for children who have dyslexia. But his was so severe, they told us we can't really help him in our school. He needs to have one-on-one teaching. And so try and find a reading therapist in Austin, Texas, all those years ago. This was not commonplace, and especially out where we lived. But I met a young woman who was going to school at the University of Texas, and she was learning how to be a reading therapist. And she said, I'm not certified. I'm a student, but I forget exactly what it was, like 200 hours, something like that, of practical work working with children who have dyslexia. So how about if I work with your son, I give you a reduced rate, since I'm not a certified academic reading therapist, I think that's their actual title. And then by working with your son, I'll get the hours I need, and then I can eventually become certified. I said, deal. So I picked up, I'm thinking, okay, how hard can it be, first grade? Yeah. So I picked up the subjects that were, beyond the reading. And then as we went along on our journey, God bless him, he found out he had dyscalculia, which is the problem with math. He had dysgraphia, the problem with writing. He's doing great now as a young man. He owns his own business and he lives in Austin. He's doing very well, but he had a lot of challenges, as a kid. So we wound up homeschooling right through 8th grade, and he received reading therapy right through 8th grade. But he's a very outgoing guy, and so he eventually went to a brick and mortar high school. It was a small high school. The public high school said it'd be too challenging for him to get the help he needed, and that he would probably, if you have parents who listen to this who homeschool, and you yourself might understand this as well, that if you ever have a child who is very outgoing, is intelligent, is talkative, but has some learning differences, and this is what the public school explained to me, they fall through the cracks because they seem like they're just doing fine. And so they don't get any help, and they just forge ahead with the own personal accommodations they have made for themselves to cope. So he wound up going to a small high school, and they were very nice. They didn't have any program in place or anything, but when you're in a small high school, people just wind up helping. And so that worked out well for him. But during our homeschool years, I'm an older mom now, and I've been raised by my mom making all of these traditional foods. So I'm in a homeschool group with moms who are much younger than me. And Sally's book comes out, and it was funny because I was reminiscing with one of my friends a while back, and I said, isn't it something how we all got interested in Sally's book? She said, Mary, you gave us all a copy, and you told us you need to read this. I didn't remember that. And it's really funny because when I go to Amazon today, it says, I often get a little notification, you've purchased this book 20 times. Are you sure you want to purchase this again? But I apparently, gave this to all these homeschool moms. And so they started reading it, and they said, you know how to make this stuff, so you need to teach us. So I said, okay, come to my house on Saturday mornings, and we'll have the dads take care of the kids and just bring the nursing babies. Mm-hmm. And we would just be around my kitchen island. This went on for years. And then other moms would have me come to their homes and whatnot. And it was funny because the very first time, I think I usually start with bone broth, but for some reason I have this memory of at my house of starting with ferments. It's a long time ago. And I was worried that they may be scared and of that, because I think that when you start with bone broth, it's a lot easier. You're cooking, nobody's worried about bacteria and all this. Right. But for some reason, I have this memory, and maybe we had already done a few of those things, and then I was getting everybody to come back, and I may have told them, okay, next week we're going to do ferments. And I sent an email and I said, all righty, we're going to do ferments, and this is really good. And I'm going to show you how to make sure that they're safe to eat. Plus, I've got door prizes. And I had my dining room table. You talk about doing things at your dining room table. I can so relate. My dining room table was filled with little different types of door prizes, all related to traditional foods. And everybody came because there were door prizes. So I got everybody back for fermentation. And it's funny because to this day, whenever I, some of the ladies have relocated to other areas, but we stay in touch, through text messaging, and other people still live here. And it's funny because I was talking with my one girlfriend, and she went on to have 6 children. And she said, "We're so hardcore, Mare. It's hard to believe. It's hard to believe when we started with this." And they were like vegans eating a raw diet or something. I can't remember, but one of her sons wasn't doing well on it. And I said, "You got to get off that." No offense to any vegans who may be listening, but it was very cute. And so that's how it started, giving her this book. And I'll never forget, one day we were having our little Saturday morning soirees and making some traditional food. And she said, "Ladies, I have a recipe for you." And I actually do this on my Mary's Nest YouTube channel. She said, "I have a recipe. You take liver, beef liver, you cut it up into small pieces, you batter dip it, and then you fry it in tallow. You put it on the table with fermented ketchup, and you tell the kids they're nuggets. And you don't say anything else." And I said, "This is fantastic. I'm going to do this." And to this day, my son laughs because I say, "Oh, they're nuggets. They're just nuggets." And he's eating them, and he's like, "Oh, okay," and dipping them in the ketchup. "Not bad. All right, they're nuggets." Kind of unusual looking when you bite into it. It doesn't look like what you're used to with the white meat, but okay. But she was so cute because she said, "But girls, I have a tip. Make sure you put the liver in the freezer before you cut it up. If you," and this is the thing that makes this so cute, is that all of these ladies were new to this type of cooking. And and she's the one now who says, 20 some odd years later, "Oh, we're so hardcore." Meaning like they're zealots, for
Yep. Yep.
traditional foods. And she says, "But ladies, listen, I learned. You got to put this in the freezer. Then you take it out of the freezer and then just give it a minute or two and then cut it up. If you try to cut up raw beef liver, it's a bloody mess." We were laughing so hard we were crying because it was so cute, because she was very sincere, that giving us this warning. But to this day, yeah, we're all making beef liver nuggets and making sure we freeze that liver first.
Oh, Mary, I just love so much of all your story.
Thank
I
you.
think one of the things that really ties, I mean, there's so many ways that our stories are very closely intertwined, minus a couple of years. But the way that your mother grew up during the Depression era, it sounds very similar to the way that the stories that my mom told me. And I also fell by the wayside and didn't take or heed the advice that she told us. She said, "Always make sure, you never know." And we were in California. "Be careful of the earthquakes. They might shut off the water." She had very many stories about the fall of Saigon. My parents are immigrants from Vietnam.
Yes.
And so
I
all of
understand
that
completely.
happened. And I remember they would tell us stories about lockdowns and curfews. And all these stories from when I was a kid, that when I grew up, I told mom and dad, like, "Can you stop telling us these stories? You're scaring me, and it's never going to happen because we're in America."
Mm-hmm.
Also, fast forward until, that's, the only thing I did was really focus on my career, focus on, being successful in the corporate world. But then 2020 happened,
Mm-hmm.
and I really was shaken up. It wasn't until I had my daughter in 2011 that I started looking into food too. So similar in a story where I said, "Okay, well, maybe I should go back to the traditional route." We use a lot of butter only from like French inspired recipes. But in Asia, we didn't really have access, or my mom and our culture didn't have much access to dairy. So she would tell me whenever we would go grocery shopping at the bulk groceries, they would have these gummy bears. And back then you could pick through and scoop out your gummy bears, put them in a bag. And I always
Yes.
loved the red ones. And the red ones were cherry. They tasted good. They looked fun. They were my favorite. And mom said, I will buy you some of those gummy bears, but you have to pick the clear ones because I don't trust what's inside it. The
Mhm.
color, I don't know where it comes from. And again, I'm thinking, oh, mom and her old ways. But there's so much to be said about the traditional wisdom that our mothers, our grandmothers had, like what you were saying about the margarine and that food coloring and squishing it in there. They know intuitively that that wasn't the food that they're used to eating.
Mhm.
With the invention of the microwave,
Oh.
probably in your generation,
Mhm.
it really encouraged moms to get out of the kitchen.
Mhm.
And now in my generation and our generation here, I feel like we are so far removed from where our food comes from.
Mhm.
Our children think that I took a class and there was a chicken running around, and there was this little boy that said to his mom, Mom, that chicken is the same name as a chicken we eat for dinner, and didn't realize that it's the same
Mhm.
animal that you ate for dinner. And so we're just so far removed. And I think in this journey of 2020, when California actually had lockdowns and curfews, that's
Mm.
when I sat mom and dad down and I said, okay, tell me the stories again. Who did they go? Who did the government go after? What should we be cautious about? And what should we
Mhm.
prepare for? And that really led us down this journey into starting a farm and being more prepared. Even though we always had, with growing up with mom, we always had buckets and buckets of rice.
Yes. That's it's very cute that, I could very much understand the stories that your parents were sharing with you because, as I shared earlier, I think before we came on, my mother-in-law is Vietnamese, and she came to the United States as a young woman, and she had such a sense of self-preservation, self-sufficiency. She would talk about taking the bones and, putting them in a pot, soaking them in a little vinegar and simmering them for hours, and how this gave them sustenance when food was in very short supply. She has stories about her childhood and growing up that are heartbreaking. It's difficult, I think, for even the poorest of the poor in this country to even understand how bad it can be for other people in other countries, especially communist countries, and how difficult life can be. And I I think that so many people, even of my generation, and being raised by parents who had struggles here in the United States, so many people living here can get lulled into a very sense of security. The grocery stores are always going to be open. What do you mean?
Exactly.
Yeah, what do you mean food lines? There's not going to be food lines. They're plentiful. This is the United States. We're going to have everything we need. There's going to be no problem. What? There's never going to be some big major war. What? Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. Why do you water? Why do you stockpiling water for? And it's cute when you mention rice because I didn't grow up, based on my ethnicity. If we had rice, it was usually in what's it called? I'm drawing a blank. The Italian risotto, in the northern Italian style, and that was more of a treat than an everyday food. And it was very cute because one of the first things my mother-in-law gave me when we got married was a rice cooker, and I have thoroughly embraced it. But I think that we got lulled in, life is very good here, and can be very easy here. Yes,
Mhm.
you have to work hard, and you have to be a productive member of society and an upstanding person, and so on and so forth. But assuming that you put in some effort, we just got lulled into how easy life can be. We have cell phones, we have laptops, we have iPads. It's just amazing when you think about it. I grew up, we had one television, it was black and white, and it had three channels. and we had one rotary dial phone, and it was in the kitchen. And you did not talk on that phone, because if somebody called you and you talked for more than 10 seconds, your mother was passing you a paper that said message units because you were charged. That phone was for emergencies only. But it's so we've got lulled into such a life. I really, even if you have a very average life, you have a life of luxury compared to how a lot of other people live in other countries. And so I think we got lulled into such a sense of being very well provided for, very well protected, no worries, nothing. And I think even after September 11th, people still felt, well, it's okay, just isolated incidents, and our country's taken care of it, and we're going to be all right. And then it's sort of interesting, my son being 25 and having lived through 9/11 at a very young age, he often says that, prior to the pandemic, a lot of people in his age group were like, okay, that was a long time ago, and it's never happened again, and we're safe, and we don't have to worry. He's very contrary to this, I think, because it's kind of that the nickname that people use, like prepper pantry. He was raised in that mindset, so he's the type that when things went awry with an ice storm here and he was in his apartment, he was very prepared, and he could help his friends and neighbors, and they were like, wow, you're really prepared. He's like, of course, I was raised, to be like this, But I think that 9/11 had been a long time ago, and we were safe after that. And then 2020 hits. People couldn't believe it. First of all, everybody was scared. I mean, I know we were terrified. We were like, what the heck is this? And it's spreading. People are dying, and they didn't know what it was. And you saw it happening all around the world. And then they start shutting things down. And I was inundated with emails and comments on my YouTube channel.
Wow.
Because people were saying, oh my gosh, what do I do? I only have like 3 days worth of food. And my heart was just going out to these people, and they were like, okay, you've talked about how to make meals from scraps. Okay, how do I do that? I mean, God bless them. Yeah. And they were like, okay, you've talked about wasting, but I never paid attention. But okay, how do I not waste anything? How do I make a meal and not waste anything? And then people were like, okay, I got my pass or whatever for when I can go to the grocery store, and I'm going to wait online, and I can get in the grocery store, and I can buy so many items. And what items should I buy? How do I stock my pantry? Oh gosh, what do I do now? They're all out of water. I can't stock on water. And I was just being inundated with so many questions in my heart. And so many of these people were young people. And, it's like, I can't, there's no bread on the shelves. How do I make bread? And then this is something that I talk to a lot. And sometimes people, if they're real zealots about traditional foods, they tend to get a little upset with me. But I realized I was working with people who had never baked anything in their life. Nothing.
Yeah.
Not even a quick bread from a box. Ooh. And then they're like, I have no sandwich bread. And I have 3 kids. How do I make sandwich bread? Yeah. And I was like, well, all right. If you got some all-purpose flour, if you can get that in your grocery store, if you got a little salt, you got a little water, and you were lucky enough to get a package of yeast, I'm going to show you how to make sandwich bread. Now, this isn't the best bread in the world, but this is how you make bread. And it was a batter bread. I didn't even make them knead it. It was just, you stirred it and poured it in the pan. And I'm like, okay, hopefully I can help some people get through this. But it was interesting, because this is what I always talk about, that traditional foods, creating a traditional foods kitchen, it's a journey.
It is.
You
Yeah.
can't, you try to tell people, and I remember when I was first teaching this to my homeschool moms and then other people in and around the community, and I would mention a sourdough starter. And I'll never forget, one lady cried at my kitchen table and she said, "I've never baked bread. What are you talking about?" You know? And I realized, okay, sometimes you just need to start with the all-purpose flour and the packaged yeast.
Exactly.
And then people were saying, it was cute because then people were coming and they were like, "Oh, that was really easy." Okay, now the grocery store is completely out of yeast. I didn't take your advice to stock up. How do I make a sourdough starter? And you're bringing them on the journey.
Yes. It's
And
so fun.
And little by little, they're like, okay. And then it was cute because people would email me, "It's bubbling."
Yeah.
And that was very cute. And then sometimes people were like, "Hey, I can't risk flour to make a sourdough starter. How else can I make yeast?" And I was like, "All righty, we're going to go farther down the journey.
Yeah.
I'm going to teach you how to make yeast water.
Yeah.
And you're going to learn how to make bread that way." Yeah. And it was very, very cute during 2020.
Yeah.
And now I find, and I really found this when I was contacted by Random House to write the Modern Pioneer Cookbook. And it was interesting because when they first contacted me, I don't even think they realized how I look at this as a journey. And when I started writing everything and sending it to my editor, it was very cute because he's like, "Wow, we're going to have to expand the page count. You really write a lot, and I don't want to cut this information." And the good news is they've asked me to write a second book now, and it's going to be even more about self-sufficiency. But in the first book, I wrote a lot about why it's so important to live your life like this, why you need to know how to make traditional foods. And I walk the reader through a journey. I start with all-purpose flour and packaged yeast. Even before that, we make a quick bread with baking powder. And then we make a bread with packaged yeast. And then I'm like, okay, you got that under your belt? Let's talk about a sourdough starter. And every chapter, I take the person on a journey.
Yeah.
In the chapter on fermentation, I start with pickling. We just do a quick pickle.
Exactly.
And then we get to ferment.
It's the series of quick wins.
Yes, exactly.
And especially and that's really great because I wanted to ask you, how do you encourage others who have not grown up the way that both you and I seem to have with our traditional moms teaching us the traditional ways? But for someone who, my husband's, second generation Asian American, so he ate a lot of packaged foods, and a lot of our early marriage problems were around food and how I said, "How can you put that junk inside your body?"
I understand completely. As my husband says, "Oh, if you don't come to the grocery store with me, bad things fall in the cart." He's very cute. He's very cute, but he's had a good attitude about getting on the traditional foods bandwagon.
That's so good.
But what I tell people, although raw milk will never be in his bailiwick, and I respect that.
Okay.
It's like what you were saying, in the Asian culture, it's not, my husband being of Vietnamese ancestry, dairy is not a big part of the diet.
Yes. Yeah.
But I embrace the rice cooker and fermented soy sauce, and we're good to go.
I love it because I feel like both you and I can come together on kind of a yin and yang, because I've now embraced, I've got kefir on my
I love it. Yeah.
So like in water kefir, I have the sugar.
Oh yeah,
just
that's
waiting,
good too.
But here I am learning all of this. And yet here I am. We didn't have a lot of dairy, but we do have our micro dairy now. And I convinced my husband, not just for self-sufficiency's sake, but after learning about raw dairy, I convinced him by basically bribing him to have an unlimited supply of ice cream.
Yes. Oh, that's the way to do it.
And
But yeah, but I tell people, I always stress it's a journey. And you don't throw out every morsel of food in your pantry on day one, because especially if you're doing this with a family, there's going to be a revolt. I mean, if you day one put sourdough bread on the table and you have small children, you always have to remember small children have very sensitive palates.
Mm-hmm.
And they taste food a lot better than us, those of us who are older.
Yeah.
And they're going to be like, oh, because I've heard this from so many people. Oh, mommy, the bread is so sour, all these things.
Because they're used to white bread at
white
the
bread, yeah. And so I always tell people, start very slowly. And I know I do take flack for this. I mean, I'm all for if you can get pasture raised, grass fed, organic, that's beautiful. But that's not always in everybody's budget. Mm-hmm. And when they're first starting this journey and they're still buying other prepared, my mother always called processed foods prepared foods. They were prepared by someone else with chemicals just for you.
Yeah.
But right. They're not transitioning to everything on the first day. So their grocery money hasn't made that transition yet to where they have a little more money to buy better food. Okay. So I always tell people, buy whatever chicken you can afford. Mm-hmm. Buy whatever vegetables you can afford. Onions, carrots, potatoes, they're usually relatively inexpensive. Don't worry about organic. If you can afford it, great, but don't worry about it. And the reason I say this is because the Environmental Working Group did a study, and they found that when they put so much emphasis on telling people to buy all their food organic, that a lot of low-income people were just throwing their hands up in the air and not buying fruits and vegetables anymore. They were buying processed foods because they were cheaper. And they realized the error of their ways, and they explained to people, just buy fruits and vegetables. Just wash them, do whatever. That's going to be better than buying the processed food. Don't get hung up about organic. And I tell people the same thing. Buy what you can afford. Start slow. And I often, I make this joke because when a lot of people will come to me and they're like crying and upset and they're overwhelmed and they're being told they have to be perfect, I say, just start with a roast chicken. Buy whatever chicken you can afford. And even I have friends, they're very nervous about touching raw poultry. Yes. And I tell them, get the little disposable plastic gloves if you're really nervous. And I said, you don't have to truss it. You don't even have to tie the legs. Just stick it in the roasting pan, cut up some onions, cut up some carrots, cut up some potatoes, throw it in your oven. If you're really feeling good about your traditional foods movement and you've started having butter in your kitchen, put a couple of dollops of butter on top of that chicken and then roast it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And when it's cooked, don't worry if you don't have a meat thermometer. If you can jiggle the leg and the juices run clear, you're good. If it's a little overcooked, don't worry about it. Nobody's going to notice. All people are going to say is, you made a whole chicken for me. You're going to serve that at the table. You're going to do what I do. My son is very cute because way before cell phones or anything, just having a boy and his buddies would be playing and they would have lightsabers and sticks and toy guns and who knows what boys have, grenades, plastic grenades, all these things. And I always used to say, boys, check your weapons at the door. And then I would just get everybody sit down, say grace, to thank the good Lord for the food we have in front of us. And I also like to take a deep breath. And I think that anybody who lives this life and has a homestead, maybe you're raising animals, I always like to give a little, especially since we do eat a omnivore diet, I do like to remember to give a little thanks to the animal that made the ultimate sacrifice so that we could eat. That's why I always say, nose to tail, do not waste anything.
Yes.
That animal made the ultimate sacrifice so you can eat and have good nutrition. But so that's how I always start people. And then they will say, oh, that was easy. Then they just take the gloves off, dump them in the garbage. Next thing they know, they're working with a cooked chicken and they feel a lot better emotionally. But how delicious to sit down with this roasted chicken and some roasted veggies. And then that's all you need.
Mm-hmm.
And people will say to me, oh, but it wasn't pasture raised. Oh, the vegetables aren't organic. I said, I don't care. What you did was not only better for you nutritionally, it was better for you mentally and emotionally to sit down at a meal and eat real food. That is better any day than going through the fast food line.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And then once they get that under their belt, then I say, don't you dare throw that carcass away. You're going to pull every piece of meat off of that chicken and you're going to repurpose it in some other way, and I give people recipes of soup or, being in Texas tacos, so on and so forth. And then I'll often tell people, if you can, just put that in the freezer with any vegetable scraps you have and hold out until you have 3 carcass. Because I find 3 chicken carcass will make a nice chicken bone broth. Unless you're brave enough and you now have chicken feet.
I was going to say,
right?
Supplement with chicken feet.
And then you get those chicken feet. And if you've got your carcass and you've got some chicken feet, you can do it with 1 carcass and you're going to get a nice broth. But, I always had chicken feet and I would keep them I would buy them. Can you imagine? I used to buy a big batch for $2. Nobody wanted them. And I would put them in the freezer. And my son ran a little tour, shall we say. And I have a little laundry room with a little small refrigerator, and it's got a little freezer area. And I would keep the chicken feet in there. And he would tell his buddies, come on in the laundry room. I got to show you something. And they'd be like, what? And I'd be in the kitchen cooking and I'd hear, and I knew exactly what was going to happen. He would take them into the laundry room, open the freezer and say, my mother keeps the alien hands in the freezer. Area 51 has nothing on her. They would go running, screaming out of the house.
So funny.
He had a lot of good laughs over different types of traditional foods, but the chicken feet was always the winner. And that's what I would say to people, and get to know and you don't even need to do anything fancy. If you have a farmer's market, that's great. If you have farms near you, that's great. If you have ranches near you, all of this is great. And you will find that over time, you're going to search out all this stuff. Yeah. But you can start as simply at your grocery store. Mm-hmm. You can say, even today, I was at Whole Foods, which is expensive, right? Mm-hmm. And I was talking because a lot of the fish at our grocery store comes already pre-prepared. And so I went over to Whole Foods because I had a plan. And I was talking to the fishmonger and I said, how much is the whole fish? And he was giving me some prices. And he said, why do you want the whole fish? I said, I actually don't. I just want the carcass, the head and the tail, because I'm making fish bone broth, fish stock, really. Mm-hmm. And he said, you just want the carcass? He said, I'd throw it out. He said, give me a couple of hours. I'm going to be filleting the fish. How about if I sell you the carcass for $2? I said, deal. And that's today, so you never know. So at the grocery store too, you can, in terms of trying to find a bargain, I get to know the people at the supermarket and they know me now. I think maybe there's a little cringe factor sometimes when they see me approaching because they never quite know what I'm going to talk to them about. But I will talk to the grocery, like right in the produce area, and I'll say, do you have any like imperfects or uglies? People have different names for them. And you can also often get very good buys. And at my local grocery store now, they've even started doing, I like to think I had a little bit of a role in this. I don't know about that, but they will have bags now of produce and it will be 50% off. And it's still fine. Maybe a little blemish here and there, but overall it's fine. 50% off.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge savings.
Yeah, and then it is.
I was just going to say that I've gotten to know the butcher, and I tell him, because it was really funny. This is going back years ago. And I went one day and I said to him, "Oh, do you have any bones? I'll buy anything. It doesn't matter to me." And he said, "Bones? What do you?" This is back when they were still butchering, in the back of the grocery store. Now it seems like everything's special order. But he's like, what kind of bone? I said, "Oh, you got some marrow bones." I said, "If you got oxtails, great." And it was so cute because he was an older gentleman. And he said, "I love you. You want to buy all the stuff nobody wants. Now, today, people want it."
Mm-hmm.
But before bone broth had the popularity it has today, I would get my milk from a dairy that's like east of our airport here in the Austin area. Very nice man. And it was just raw milk, unpasteurized. And I was chatting with him one day and I said, "Gee, you were in Texas, do you know any ranchers who want to sell bones?" And he's like, "Bones? You want to buy bones?" And I'm like, "If there's anybody, I'll buy some meat too, but if they want to sell bones." He goes, "They'll be somebody here next week." So I go next week and there's a rancher there. I'm telling you, I know this is audio, but just imagine something with maybe the circumference of about 3 feet. Big bag filled with fresh bones, marrow bones, oxtails. I don't even know. I mean, he's just a big, and he's holding, it's huge, like a yoga ball. And he says, "This is great. You want to buy these? This would just be discarded." I said, "This is fantastic." I said, "How much?" He said, again, I don't know what it is with people, $2. It's like, I said, "Oh no, I'm giving you more than $2. I said, "You don't realize how valuable this is." I said, "And I have a whole host of ladies who are going to want to buy this from you."
Yeah.
Next thing you knew, we were buying the whole cow, divvying it up, get it. Can you imagine? We were paying back in the day, I think it's like over $7 now, back in the day, like $3 a pound.
Wow.
And he loved us because we wanted the liver. We wanted, everything, even my one girlfriend, she was very brave. She's like, "I'll take the sweetbreads."
Yeah.
We were like, "Well, let us know how they are, But it's really funny, but we've laughed because I've definitely shared this with other people, and you probably can relate to this, that once you just start at your grocery store, once you start down the path of the traditional foods journey, next thing you know, you're like, "Oh, is there a farmer's market in my area? Is there somebody I can get to know? Oh, is there somebody who raises chickens in the area? Is somebody selling eggs, Oh, and you get to meet these people at the farmer's market. You're like, "Oh, you have a farm? Oh, you have a ranch? Oh, can I come out? Can I see it? Can I buy directly from you? Do you sell a whole cow? Can we divide it up amongst 4 people?" And it's so funny how I have seen people who I would describe otherwise as introverts who are at the farmer's market grilling the farmer, grilling the rancher, and it's just so cute to see. But you there's this person inside of you that emerges that becomes this extreme extrovert when it comes to finding the traditional foods you need, because you're not taking no for an answer. Yeah.
I was going to raise my hand. That was me.
Right, right.
I mean, down to the path where you start asking so many questions that you're like, wait a minute, how come this man does it this way and this one doesn't? And then you go down the path of like, you know what? Maybe we should start our own farm. It's not going to be so hard if we can figure a couple of things out. But yeah, that's such a lovely story and wonderful tips for new people who are wanting to learn how to eat traditionally. And what wonderful ways. We just butchered our very first cow that was born here.
Oh my goodness.
So it's been 2 years. When we first moved here, we brought home a cow and we just butchered him. And interestingly, I said the same thing. Can I have the oxtail, the heart, the kidney, the liver, all of it? Now, he vacuum sealed every other part of the animal. When he gave it back to me, he gave it back to me in one of those like grocery shopping bags. All of the liver, the heart, the oxtail. And I was like, oh, why didn't you vacuum seal this? And he said, well, it's dog food.
Yep.
It's funny because when my parents, and I used to be embarrassed about this, because my parents would say when they were first here in the United States, they were asking their sponsor up in Seattle, same thing, where do we get all of the organ meats? And they said, no. In America, we don't eat that. That is for dogs only.
Isn't it funny? No, it's so true. I grew up, and this was something funny too that my son was reminiscing about, and how his friends make a joke about it, that it's something that's perceived as unappetizing. I grew up eating, chicken liver. That was a treat, and chicken hearts and gizzards. The chicken gizzard that my father would saute up, and the chicken hearts, and oh my gosh, that stuff was delicious. And my son was joking because he said, oh, I think I'll have, he just moved to Austin and he's got a new apartment. He's like, oh, Mom, should I have a housewarming party and have chicken hearts? Hey, chicken hearts on a skewer. But it's delicious.
Tell him it's actually in Fogo de Chao, which is one of the most fanciest Brazilian steakhouses.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, it's. I think that's very true, and I would imagine that many immigrants who come to the United States are discouraged from eating traditional foods. And I will tell you, to a certain extent, I can understand a little bit about why people may discourage others from eating fish sauce. And it's because I didn't know what real fish sauce was that was traditionally made. And my girlfriend, she's originally from Vietnam, and she's married to a Russian fella who, God bless him, because he's going along with the traditional foods journey. And I think maybe it has to do with the fact that he did immigrate from Russia, so he's a little more old school about traditional foods. But she's actually very Americanized. And when we started doing traditional foods with Sally's book, she's like, oh, I really want to recapture this. I really want to get into this, and I want to make these foods, and so on and so forth. And I was like, oh, me too. I'm excited, And it was very cute because she said, you and I, we're going to try this kombucha. So she got the SCOBY somewhere, and she said, I give up. I don't know what the heck to do with this thing. So she gave it to me. I left it on my counter for months. I didn't know what to do with it. It grew to the size of a small tire. And I was hacking at it like something out of some horror movie with a steak knife, trying to get the thing out of the container. Oh, mamma mia. But then she says, all right, let's put kombucha on the back shelf for a little while. Let's do a traditional food from my culture. I'm like, I'm all in. She goes, we're making fish sauce.
Oh.
I'm telling you, you need it. This is, Sophie, this is why you need everyone, not you. You wrote this for us, The Nourishing Asian Kitchen. We so desperately needed your book We did not have your book. And we forged ahead. Just, I don't know what we were doing, but it smelled so bad in the house. So we moved it to her back porch. We could still smell it. We moved it to the far corner of the yard, and she had a long backyard. And we could still smell it. And she's like, I don't know what we did. She said, and it was very cute, her being of Vietnamese ethnicity, because she's like, oh my God, we got to talk to your mother-in-law. We got to talk to somebody who's Vietnamese. She's so Americanized. She's like, we got to talk to somebody who knows what the heck we need to be doing because we're not doing something right. And so I have to tell you, I was like afraid of fish sauce. But now I'm like so open to it. And I actually made a recipe from your book a couple of weeks ago with and you have to correct me on the pronunciation, being of Italian heritage, we say vermicelli, but I think you say vermicelli. And so I did a recipe somewhat like that. And I bought the fish sauce, but my friend Michelle, who I was mentioning to you earlier, who has the YouTube channel Chocolate Box Cottage, she's very cute because she told me, she said, okay, this is the brand you need to find. Yes. And she said, when you have real fish sauce and good fish sauce, and then eventually when you learn how to make it properly, homemade, you're going to love fish sauce. And I think that is so true. And I think being able to make everything homemade, as you have shared with us in the Nourishing Asian Kitchen, makes all the difference in the world. Because if you are not of Asian heritage and you didn't grow up with these foods, and they can be very foreign to you. And having a guide like yours, I mean, this is a manual. This is exactly the companion that we needed to Nourishing Traditions. Because Nourishing Traditions, although excellent, doesn't have the level of detail that you need to properly make Asian foods. But now we have that. And I wish we had this 20 years ago when my girlfriend and I were doing the fish sauce on her back deck and then in her backyard. And at some point we were like, what do we do? It's safe to eat. It was really funny. But yeah, initially when you're first getting started, if you find the right brand, you'll know it. And then you learn to make it homemade, then you're golden.
Oh, well, thank you, Mary. I mean, I wish that someone had written this book 20 years ago too.
Right?
And honestly, when I started looking into traditional foods and real foods, whole foods, that was 12 years ago when my daughter was born. But I was really hoping that someone would write this, the perfect companion to Nourishing Traditions. Mm-hmm. And it didn't happen until, last year. And I said, I guess no one's writing it. And I thought, how would I want to leave our story, the legacy behind? A lot of these recipes are my mom's recipes that I've cooked alongside her for the last 12 years, refining it to make it exactly the way that I feel Dr. Weston Price, had he gone to Asia and visited those indigenous tribes in Asia, he would have found that this is how we traditionally made our food. And so I'm so thrilled and happy to hear that it wasn't intimidating for you and that you love it.
Oh, not at all. I love it. When I saw it, I was like beside myself, especially too being married to someone of Asian ancestry. I want to make foods that he likes and enjoys. And I've had a few successes. I've had a lot of fails. It's been challenging because there wasn't this book. You can find people who will show you how to make foods, but they make them more in the processed American way. I don't want that in my kitchen.
Exactly.
And I read the ingredients, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like all store-bought stuff. And then you look at what's in that store-bought stuff, and you're like, oh, I don't want to bring this into my kitchen. I want to feed my family in a healthy way. And I got so excited, and I said, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And then I saw it because it says your middle name on the book. You have Wynn. That's my mother-in-law's maiden name. And then I saw the foreword by Sally Fallon. I said, oh my gosh, I need this book. And I just have loved it since day one. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for writing this. We needed this.
Oh, thank you, Mary. And I'm so excited to get a copy of your new book that has just recently come out, right?
Yes, in August of 2024. Wait, no, we're in 2024. August of 2023, the Modern Pioneer Cookbook was released, and basically, I look at it as a manual also to take people on the traditional foods journey who may have had some challenges and need help with some basic cooking. In each chapter, we start very easy with a roast chicken. We start very easy with bone broth. We move on to more advanced concepts. And every chapter we do that. We start very easy and then we advance to things that are more in under the traditional foods umbrella. And so that's what I was really hoping, that people could have this on their shelf as a manual to help them on this journey. So, even with cultured dairy, I don't try to force them right away to be doing things with raw milk or to be even making homemade yogurt. I start easy with like a little stovetop cheese or something like that. And so it's my hope that the Modern Pioneer Cookbook can help people who may have felt overwhelmed and may have felt, how can I implement this in my kitchen and how can I just make it a journey?
Mm, that is so wonderful. And I know if you haven't seen Mary's YouTube channel, Mary's Nest, definitely go check it out. I love your videos. I love the stories that you share on there, how just delightful it is to watch you on camera. Now, is that around the same kitchen island that you were teaching your girlfriends?
Exactly. Yep. We've lived in this house our whole married life, basically, except for the first few weeks that we were in my husband's house. But we moved out here, and it's that same kitchen island where we would all be gathered around. And then I'm sitting at my kitchen table. I have a fireplace in the kitchen, which is nice. And we would sit at this kitchen table, and sometimes, we'd be eating, other times we'd be chatting. Moms would be nursing their babies, very, very lovely, very happy memories from those years.
Oh, wonderful. That's going to mean so much more now when I go back to watch.
Now we need to get, I don't think you are on YouTube yet, are you?
We are.
Oh, you are.
I've just been so embarrassed about my kitchen though, but just listening to how you shared, maybe it's just something that it becomes iconic.
Now, is it the same name as your podcast or?
No, it's Sprinkle with Soil.
Oh, okay. That's
Yeah.
why I couldn't. Oh, I was looking based on that. I'm going to mention this. I'm going to share this with my community. Sprinkle with Soil. Okay, I've got
Yes.
it. I wrote it down. Don't never be embarrassed about your kitchen. And I want to tell you something. And maybe your listeners will be interested in this, for any that maybe have thought about starting a YouTube channel or are hesitant to do one. Don't worry, because 99% of the time, people are very nice to you. You get those 1% mean comments, just delete them or just move on. Don't let it. But I was recently asked to be a panelist at a conference called Grow with Video Live that is sponsored by a company called Think Media. And they're on YouTube, Think Media. The person who founded the company is Sean Cannell, very nice man. And he invited me to be a panelist on one of the presentations they had of one day of the conference. And something that I learned while I was there was that people are craving more and more authenticity. That was like the whole word. I can't even tell you how many. I'd be a millionaire for how many times I heard that word at the conference if I had a nickel for every time I heard it. And people were saying how even very famous big creators who have millions and millions of subscribers, that they're pulling back on how they're editing their videos. They're not going to be so slick anymore. They're going to talk a little more directly to their viewers. They're not going to have a lot of, the way sometimes videos can go with all these images flashing at you, that people have been oversaturated with perfection and fast, when things go very fast and a lot of images flash on the screen. And that people are looking for another person that they can relate to who's in our category, our niche, whatever you want to call it, how to do something.
Yeah.
And they just want you to be straight and forward and honest. And it's okay if your kitchen's not perfect. It's okay if your kitchen's 50 years old. It's okay if, in my case, you got white laminate cabinets that are chipped. Yeah, and it's sort of funny because when the pictures in my cookbook are taken in my kitchen, and some are taken just like right freely in my kitchen. The photographer also has like little different backgrounds. They're just like big pieces of cardboard or something. I don't quite know how to describe it, but so that there's some variety.
Right.
But it was funny because the cover of the book has a picture of me. I'm standing at the kitchen island. And I remember it was very cute. They were a little concerned when they were making the cover that my sink was showing in the background. And I said, don't worry about it. I said, people know me. People know I stand at my kitchen island and my sink is behind me.
Yes, that's
and
true.
sometimes there's stuff in the sink, And don't worry about it. It's much better than trying to doctor it and try to make something look blurry or whatever the case may be. And so I was so happy because they agreed that they were okay with, what I was asking for, just leave everything as is. Don't blur anything. And so I do feel that people appreciate that. So never let what your kitchen looks like hold you back. Just forge ahead. I mean, I have 2 coffee pots because my husband does decaf. I do caffeinated. I have 2 coffee pots, and people will be like, oh, for heaven's sakes, your counter is so cluttered. And I'm like, I'm making 3 meals a day. I'm busy. Yeah, I'm cluttered. I'm not a minimalist.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's a good trend we're on.
Yeah.
That viewers are looking for real people in real kitchens, not Pinterest perfect, as I say, not, I don't know what they call it on Instagram ready or whatever. It makes people feel bad about their own life.
Yeah.
And you never want to make people feel bad about their own life. Their own life is just fine.
Yeah.
And those videos that are very heavily edited and orchestrated and a beautiful setting, or something on Pinterest, something on Instagram, that's often staged, and a lot of time and effort went into all of that. Mm-hmm. That's not real life with a woman with her hair pulled back in a ponytail, slippers on, and trying to get a chicken carcass shoved down into a 5-quart stock pot.
Right.
So, well, I'm looking forward. I'm going to look up your channel. I'm so glad I know that, and forgive me if you had told me this before and I just missed it, and I'll share this with my viewers because I already talked about your cookbook.
Oh, you did.
Yeah. So they will know about your channel as well. So I hope that you will forge ahead because you have an amazing amount of knowledge to share.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary. And I'm so excited that our listeners now are going to be checking out your page, your website, and all of your social media on Mary's Nest, right?
Yes, it's all Mary's Nest, so it's easy to find.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much, Mary, for joining us on the Call to Farms podcast. I can't wait to see you soon.
Yes, Sophie, so nice to know you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.